They said nothing ever got stolen in Hollywood. At least, not if the studio could help it. While the cameras rolled and the stars shone, a different kind of action unfolded in the shadows. Daring heists, inside jobs, and priceless treasures vanishing without a trace. How did the legendary studios keep these headline-making crimes out of the public eye? And who really paid the price for silence? The truth behind these lost treasures is far stranger than anything the silver screen ever imagined. The David Niven jewelry theft scandal. In the rarefied world of Golden Age Hollywood, a glamorous soiree was as much a status symbol as an Oscar on the mantle. The English actor David Niven, with his effortless charm and impeccable manners, was a regular host to the film colony's elite. But one particular party in the late 1940s would be remembered not for its A-list guest list or champagne toasts, but for the theft that nearly toppled reputations, and how the studios stepped in to cover the mess before it exploded into scandal. Niven's Hollywood Hills mansion was the site of the crime, and the occasion was as star-studded as any Academy Awards after-party. Guests included studio bosses, leading ladies in furs and diamonds, and directors whose names could open any door in town. As the evening wore on, laughter and music drifted across the lawn until, with the guests distracted, an unknown thief struck. By the time the sun rose over Mulholland Drive, several pieces of priceless jewelry had vanished: bracelets, rings, and even an heirloom necklace that had adorned the necks of royalty. What could have been a run-of-the-mill burglary in any other city became a ticking time bomb in Hollywood. The victims weren't just socialites. They were the wives and mistresses of studio executives, film financiers, and even a major starlet. The theft threatened to ignite a powder keg of gossip about who had been present, what had been said, and what secrets might come spilling out if the story reached the press. Some whispered that the crime was an inside job, maybe even committed by someone at the party. The studios, particularly Niven's home studio, swung into action. Their fixers coordinated with the LAPD, who, for a generous favor, agreed to keep reports quiet. Private detectives were hired, not just to find the jewels, but to ensure discretion. The studio quietly reimbursed the value of the missing items to the most influential guests, using a maze of shell accounts and hush payments. Meanwhile, whispers were put out to the city's gossip columnists that the story was wildly exaggerated. Just another Hollywood rumor. Within days, the matter was quietly resolved, or so it seemed. The missing jewelry was never recovered, and no one was ever charged. Niven himself would later laugh off the incident in interviews, brushing it away as a prank. But in reality, it had taken a small army of fixers and payoffs to make sure that one night's bad luck didn't become the next day's front-page scandal. Behind the glittering facade of Golden Age parties, stories like these were common, a reminder that the true magic of Hollywood wasn't just on screen, but in the careful choreography that kept its secrets in the shadows. The Universal Studios soundstage safe job. Universal Studios in the 1940s was a bustling hive of activity, a playground for monsters, starlets, and the hard-working crew who made movie dreams possible. But in 1949, a brazen act would shake the lot to its core and leave the studio reeling, not from the boldness of the crime, but from the fear of what might happen if the public ever found out. The tale began on a rainy Saturday night, when the backlot was deserted except for a skeleton crew. In the darkness, a small team of professional thieves managed to bypass security, slip past the rows of prop cars and monster costumes, and target one of the studio's sound stages that doubled as a payroll office. These weren't small-time crooks. This was an operation that required planning, nerve, and, many suspected, inside information. What happened next reads like a scene from a heist film. The gang tunneled through a rarely used storeroom, avoiding the main entrances and all the studio's visible guards. Once inside, they made quick work of the office safe, hauling away the entire week's payroll. The loss was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars, earmarked for hundreds of workers who would arrive on Monday to empty envelopes and ask angry questions. Universal's executives were horrified, not just by the financial loss, but by the potential for scandal. With labor unions already pressing for higher wages and the industry still battling anti-Hollywood sentiment in the press, news of a massive theft, especially one that suggested insider help, was a powder keg. The studio's top fixers met with the LAPD, who, in a display of old-school Hollywood cooperation, agreed to keep the details out of the public eye in exchange for certain studio favors and a few consulting fees. Quietly, Universal hired private investigators to dig into the crime, while the official police inquiry went nowhere. Suspected inside men were dismissed or shuffled to distant departments. When angry workers began whispering about lost pay, Universal issued a statement about clerical errors, then topped up the missing wages from its own coffers, desperate to quell unrest. The thieves were never caught, and the stolen money was never recovered. For years, the story was only told in hushed voices on the backlot, a cautionary tale about greed and loyalty. The real crime, some said, wasn't just the theft, but the studio's ability to bury the truth. Yet another example of how the dream factories of Hollywood would go to any length to keep their image pristine, no matter what lurked in the shadows. The Joan Crawford Velvet Lips blackmail film. Hollywood's golden age was built on glamour, but underneath it pulsed a current of secrets and threats, a reality that Joan Crawford knew all too well. By the time she became a bona fide star at MGM, Crawford's past was already the subject of whispered gossip. But one scandal nearly exploded into the open: the rumored existence of an early adult film called Velvet Lips. While the question of whether Crawford ever actually appeared in such a film remains hotly debated, what's indisputable is that the attempted theft and blackmail surrounding this supposed reel sent shockwaves through the studio and led to an all-out cover-up orchestrated by MGM's legendary fixers. The story began in the shadows. Sometime in the late 1920s, as Crawford's career was just catching fire, a mysterious figure approached the studio's publicity department with a grainy film allegedly starring a much younger Joan Crawford in compromising scenes. Whether the footage was real, faked, or a clever composite, it was convincing enough to be dangerous. The timing could not have been worse. Crawford was on the verge of A-list status, and MGM was marketing her as the epitome of modern American womanhood. The threat was clear. A rival studio, a tabloid, or an opportunistic criminal could destroy everything if the reel went public. Enter Eddie Mannix and Howard Strickling, the studio's cleaners. They tracked the blackmailer's moves across Los Angeles, employing a mix of payoffs, intimidation, and private detectives. Crawford herself was kept out of the spotlight, while negotiations and threats were exchanged in the shadows. According to later biographies and interviews with MGM insiders, the studio paid a significant sum, reportedly over $100,000, an enormous amount in Depression-era dollars, to retrieve and destroy the film. Crawford's brother was even rumored to have been involved, using his family connection to try to extort more money before MGM shut him down. But the problem didn't end with the film's recovery. The studio launched a quiet campaign to destroy any secondary copies, tracking down rumored prints that surfaced in private men's clubs and backroom screenings. FBI files and private investigator reports suggest the studio's legal department worked overtime to intimidate anyone who hinted at possessing a copy. In the press, Crawford fiercely denied ever having participated in such a project, calling it pure invention. Studio allies in the media ran stories attacking the credibility of the supposed blackmailer, painting him as a bitter nobody out for a quick payday. To this day, the Velvet Lips film has never surfaced, and historians continue to debate whether it ever existed at all. But the scandal's real impact was in how MGM flexed its power to suppress a threat, protect its star, and shape the narrative. For Joan Crawford, The cover-up was a reminder that in Hollywood, the illusion of purity was everything, and the studio would stop at nothing to defend it. Colombia's missing Oscar statuette heist. Winning an Academy Award was, and still is, the ultimate dream for anyone in the film industry. But in the 1940s, for Columbia Pictures, that dream took a bizarre turn when a brazen heist on the studio lot left several Oscar statuettes missing and triggered a frantic, behind-the-scenes cover-up that never made it to the gossip columns. It happened just after the annual Academy Awards, when the studio's latest batch of gold-plated statuettes, freshly awarded to its actors, directors, and craftsmen, were proudly displayed in a locked glass case in the executive building. The case was a symbol of prestige, not just for the recipients, but for Columbia itself, a visual reminder of its growing influence in a town long dominated by MGM and Warner Brothers. But one Monday morning, as executives arrived for work, they found the display case empty, pried open with the careful precision of someone who knew the building's security routines. Panic ensued. For a studio that lived and died on its reputation, the loss of not one, but several Oscars was unthinkable. The Academy was notified quietly, and an internal investigation began at once. The first suspicion fell on disgruntled staff, perhaps a worker who felt slighted, or an outsider with inside help. The stakes were enormous. If word got out, it would be a public embarrassment for Columbia, suggesting both carelessness and vulnerability. Worse, it could ignite a feeding frenzy among rival studios, columnists, and even the Academy itself. The studio's fixers worked overtime, quietly interrogating employees, scrutinizing security logs, and dispatching trusted private detectives to the city's pawn shops and underworld contacts. The solution? Columbia negotiated with the Academy for discreet replacements, freshly minted Oscars, issued without fanfare or press releases. The original recipients were told to keep quiet, and the studio quietly footed the bill for the replacements. Meanwhile, the investigation pointed to a small group of maintenance staff with access to after-hours keys, but there was never enough evidence to press charges. Suspects were let go quietly, paid off, or found themselves transferred to distant locations in the studio system. The stolen statuettes themselves were never recovered, fueling years of rumors about what became of them. Some claimed they turned up in private collections overseas. Others whispered they were melted down for their gold. But officially, the heist never happened. The Academy kept silent. The recipients went on with their careers, and Columbia's public image never wavered. In a town obsessed with appearances, the real crime wasn't the theft. It was the studio's uncanny ability to erase it from memory. The story of the missing Oscars became yet another chapter in Hollywood's unwritten history, where the real drama played out far from the bright lights of the stage. The Great Prop Warehouse Burglaries. In the glory days of the studio system, the prop warehouses of Hollywood were veritable treasure troves, crammed with priceless costumes, antique jewelry, elaborate weaponry, and set pieces from every era imaginable. These storerooms represented millions of dollars in assets and untold hours of craftsmanship. Yet, beginning in the 1940s and stretching well into the 1950s, a series of systematic burglaries swept through the prop departments of Hollywood's biggest studios. Unlike the spectacular smash-and-grab jobs that made headlines, these were inside jobs carried out slowly and quietly over the years. And the studios, terrified of the bad press and union trouble, did everything in their power to cover up what amounted to one of Hollywood's longest-running heists. The scale of the theft was staggering. Over time, original costumes from films like The Adventures of Robin Hood or Ben-Hur, gemstone-encrusted crowns, ancient-looking swords, and even props as iconic as Maltese Falcon replicas simply vanished. When auditors began to question discrepancies in inventory, excuses ranged from lost in shipping to damaged beyond repair. But the truth was far more embarrassing. Crews, warehousemen, and even a handful of trusted set designers were siphoning off Hollywood's history, piece by piece, and selling it to wealthy collectors, antique shops, and the burgeoning memorabilia black market. The studio's first instinct was self-preservation. Executives feared that exposing the thefts would not only embarrass them in front of the press and the public, but would spark labor unrest, already a sensitive subject with post-war unionization on the rise. Rather than call the police or issue public statements, they quietly fired or reassigned the staff members who seemed to be involved, making generous severance payments in exchange for silence. In some notorious cases, private detectives were dispatched, not to recover stolen items, but to ensure that word of the thefts never reached the ears of Hollywood's notoriously nosy press corps. Meanwhile, the true scale of the loss became known only to a select few. Insurance claims were filed under vague headings, and in annual reports, lost inventory became a catch-all explanation for hundreds of missing artifacts. It wasn't until decades later, when some of these treasures surfaced at auctions or in the homes of prominent film fans, that the full scope of the burglaries came to light. For the studios, the silent hemorrhaging of their own history was a cost of doing business, a secret best kept buried. In the end, the great prop warehouse burglaries were never officially acknowledged, let alone solved. The studio's ability to manage the story, to turn an industry-wide crisis into a whisper among insiders, was perhaps the greatest magic trick of Hollywood's golden age. It was a reminder that sometimes the most valuable props never made it back to the set, and the real drama happened far from the cameras. The Gone with the Wind costume jewel swindle. Few films captured the public imagination like Gone with the Wind, and the costumes, particularly Scarlett O'Hara's dazzling jewelry, became legendary in their own right. But behind the scenes, one of the most audacious heists of the Golden Age unfolded, one that would only come to light many years later. The original jewelry pieces, which had graced the necks and wrists of Vivien Leigh and Olivia de Havilland, were stolen from the MGM vault and replaced with cunningly crafted fakes, a switch so subtle that it fooled nearly everyone. Yet the scandal was never made public, as MGM chose to quietly bury the theft rather than risk damaging the film's legacy or the studio's reputation. The story began in the immediate aftermath of the film's enormous success. MGM, understanding the future value of the props and costumes, stored them in a highly secure vault, believing them to be safe from both time and temptation. But temptation found its way in. Insiders, likely trusted studio employees familiar with the labyrinthine back corridors and security routines, pulled off the switch. The real jewels disappeared, and expertly made replicas were left in their place. When the pieces were later displayed for charity events or promotional purposes, not even the studio's archivists suspected the ruse. MGM's executives were mortified when, through an outside appraiser, the truth finally surfaced. The jewelry was worthless costume glass, not the precious gems they had insured for a small fortune. An emergency meeting was called, and the news was kept strictly confidential. Only the top brass, legal advisors, and a handful of trusted staff ever knew. There was no police report, no press release, and certainly no mention in the fan magazines that slavishly documented every detail of Gone with the Wind lore. Instead, MGM made an internal decision. The loss would be written off, quietly, and the public would be none the wiser. Insurance was quietly collected under the guise of accidental loss, and, to deflect suspicion, the studio began to emphasize the story that all the film's jewelry was costume, never truly valuable in the first place. Any staff member who asked too many questions was reassigned, and records of the incident disappeared into confidential files. To this day, some believe the real Scarlet jewels reside in private collections, occasionally surfacing at secretive auctions for the right price. The Gone with the Wind costume jewel swindle remains one of Hollywood's most impressive sleight of hand, a glittering crime, forever hidden behind the velvet curtain, where appearance always mattered more than reality. Warner Brothers Studio Commissary, Embezzlement, 1930s. In the bustling heyday of the 1930s, Warner Brothers Studios was a city unto itself. Behind the glossy facade of marquee stars and blockbuster gangster flicks was an entire ecosystem. Set builders, costumers, drivers, and, at the heart of it all, the famous Warner Brothers commissary. This was the studio's beating heart, a social hub where legends and extras alike rubbed shoulders over coffee and steaks. But beneath the clatter of cutlery, a cunning crime was being cooked up right under the noses of studio executives. For years, a trusted commissary manager embezzled thousands from the daily receipts, and the studio, desperate to avoid a scandal, quietly swept it under the rug. The scam was simple, but effective. Each day, the commissary brought in a small fortune from the studio's never-ending flow of workers, actors, and big shots. Cash changed hands quickly, and paper records were easy to manipulate in a pre-digital era. The manager, long considered loyal and indispensable, took advantage of the system's trust. Small amounts skimmed from the top, first a few dollars, then hundreds, then thousands, added up over time. When occasional shortages were noticed, they were chalked up to bookkeeping errors or inventory losses. The turning point came when a new accountant was brought in as part of a studio-wide push for greater efficiency. Reviewing years of records, she began to see the pattern, discrepancies that traced back to one individual. Faced with mounting evidence, Warner Brothers executives convened a secret meeting. They were horrified, not only by the sum involved, which reportedly ran into the tens of thousands, a massive figure in Depression-era dollars, but by what a public scandal could mean for the studio's image and labor relations. Rather than risk headlines blaring, "Embezzlement at Warner Brothers," and igniting union outrage, the studio opted for damage control. The commissary manager was dismissed quietly, with a generous severance package and a stern warning. No police report was filed. Rumors about the real reason for the sudden departure swirled among longtime employees, but the official story was one of retirement. To further ensure silence, Warner Brothers covered any missing funds and issued a bland memo promising improved accounting procedures. The press never got wind of the crime. For Warner Brothers, the greater risk was not the loss of money, but the potential loss of face. By choosing to handle the embezzlement in-house, the studio reinforced a golden rule of old Hollywood. The image on screen and in the headlines always mattered more than what happened behind the scenes. In the end, the commissary returned to business as usual. The stars kept coming, and the legend of Warner Brothers grew, untouched by scandal, at least in public. The Errol Flynn pirate treasure stunt robbery. To the public, Errol Flynn was the ultimate swashbuckler, devilishly handsome, endlessly charming, and always on the hunt for adventure. But during the production of one of Flynn's famed pirate epics in the 1940s, the boundary between screen fantasy and real-life intrigue blurred when a trove of gold props and set pieces vanished from the set, in an incident the studio would go to great lengths to downplay. It began on the sprawling sound stages of Warner Brothers, transformed into the Caribbean for a lavish pirate production. The set glittered with fake gold doubloons, elaborate jewel-encrusted chests, and weapons crafted by Hollywood's best prop artisans. For days, Flynn and his fellow actors staged battles and treasure hunts amid the carefully constructed loot. But as shooting neared its end, the props department noticed something strange. Several of the most valuable treasures were gone. The missing items included gold-plated goblets, ornate swords, and even one of the centerpiece treasure chests. The loss represented not just thousands of dollars in materials and labor, but a logistical nightmare for the film's continuity and budget. The suspicion, whispered on the lot, was that an inside man had orchestrated the heist, perhaps a disgruntled prop handler, maybe an extra eager for a keepsake, or even someone higher up. Some rumors even pointed at Flynn himself, whose reputation for wild antics and off-screen pranks was legendary. Studio brass was in no mood for a scandal. Warner Brothers fixers stepped in, calling on trusted security men and private detectives to conduct a discreet investigation. To the public, and even to many in the cast and crew, the official explanation was that the missing props had been misplaced or damaged in storage. Privately, a handful of staff members were quietly fired or reassigned, and the studio replaced the lost items with hastily made duplicates to finish the film on schedule. Flynn, for his part, played up the story in later years as another one of his offbeat Hollywood adventures, but denied any involvement. The studio, meanwhile, successfully prevented the story from leaking to the press, protecting both Flynn's reputation and its own bottom line. The pirate treasure robbery was never solved, and the missing props occasionally surfaced in private memorabilia collections years later, priceless to film buffs, but a closed case as far as Warner Brothers was concerned. In the end, the incident became just another colorful tale from the wild, unregulated era of classic Hollywood, a time when stars and scoundrels often shared the same spotlight, and the studios could bury almost any secret, no matter how glittering. The Fox Film Vault Fire and Insurance Fraud Allegations, 1937. In 1937, a disaster struck Fox Film Corporation that would be remembered for its destruction, but also for the rumors and cover-up that followed. The Fox Film Vault Fire, which incinerated thousands of original negatives and prints from Hollywood's silent era, was officially blamed on the highly flammable nature of nitrate film. Yet, from the moment the ashes settled, whispers about insurance fraud, internal sabotage, and studio cover-up began to circulate, adding another layer to the mystery and loss. The fire was a catastrophe for the film industry. It erupted without warning, fueled by the nitrate film stock stored inside. By the time fire crews arrived, the vault was engulfed in flames so hot that they warped steel beams and sent toxic smoke billowing across the city. Lost were hundreds of silent films, masterpieces, forgotten projects, and rare newsreels, representing an irreplaceable piece of cinematic history. Fox executives publicly mourned the loss, expressing outrage and pledging to restore what could be restored. But even as the studios issued statements of sorrow, insurance adjusters were quietly taking inventory of what had truly been lost. The amount claimed in insurance, millions of dollars in today's money, was eye-opening. Industry insiders began to whisper that the value of some destroyed assets had been grossly inflated, and that certain negatives were declared lost, despite having been duplicated or rendered obsolete. Fox, facing financial headwinds during the Depression, stood to benefit immensely from a large insurance payout. The LAPD and local fire inspectors conducted an investigation, but were hampered by the studio's legal team and the lack of clear evidence. There were no formal charges, no public accusations, and no one was ever held accountable. Behind the scenes, the studio quietly settled with the insurance company, made peace with city authorities, and shut down any internal dissent. Employees who raised questions about missing inventories or suspicious record-keeping soon found themselves transferred or dismissed. In the press, the incident was described as a tragic accident, a fluke of chemistry and fate. But for those who had worked at Fox, or in the industry's tight-knit circles, the story never quite added up. Some still believe that the fire was set intentionally, either as a desperate bid to cash in on insurance or to destroy evidence of shady studio dealings. Today, the Fox Film Vault Fire is remembered as one of the greatest archival tragedies in Hollywood history. But to insiders, it remains a symbol of the studio system's shadowy side, a world where money, reputation, and power were the true treasures, and the truth could always be rewritten, just like the scripts that made Hollywood famous. The Chaplin Studio Vault Burglary. Charlie Chaplin was more than just a film star. He was a Hollywood institution, an auteur whose creative independence was almost as legendary as his little tramp persona. But in the late 1940s, Chaplin's own carefully guarded studio became the scene of a true-life Hollywood heist that nearly stole away some of the most precious artifacts of cinema's golden era. At the time, Chaplin Studios was one of the few major independent production houses in Hollywood, a place where the star could craft films without the meddling of big studio bosses. Inside its modest vault, Chaplin kept more than just business records. He stored original negatives, rough cuts, outtakes, and private memorabilia that chronicled decades of movie history. For film historians and Chaplin fans, these materials would now be considered priceless. One foggy night, skilled burglars slipped through the backlot's perimeter. Reports from security guards, who were later quietly dismissed, suggest the culprits had inside help. They made their way to the vault, bypassing a series of locked doors and rudimentary alarm systems. By morning, several film canisters and rare personal items were missing. Among them, unreleased reels, handwritten notes, and even some of Chaplin's props from early silent comedies. The loss was more than just financial. For Chaplin, who was already facing increasing political scrutiny in post-war America, the threat of leaked, unfinished footage or the black market sale of his personal effects posed a risk to both his legacy and his ongoing legal battles. If word got out, the studio's reputation for security would be in tatters, and the vultures of the Hollywood press would circle. But Chaplin was no stranger to the power of silence. His loyal business manager quickly enlisted a team of private investigators, some of whom were former police officers known for their discretion. They tracked the items through LA's criminal underworld, tracing rumors of rare Chaplin reels being offered for sale to private collectors in New York and Europe. Studio fixers quietly negotiated for the return of most items, sometimes exchanging cash, sometimes simply making veiled threats about the dangers of crossing one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. All the while, the incident was kept as far from the public and press as possible. There were no police reports, no newspaper headlines, only rumors among a select few insiders. Those security guards who were suspected of complicity vanished from the payroll overnight. Chaplin, outwardly unshaken, continued to work, never acknowledging the theft in public. The Chaplin Studio vault burglary remains a testament to how even the brightest lights of Hollywood could be targeted by those hoping to cash in on celluloid gold. But in this case, the true story, like so many in Tinseltown, was expertly edited behind the scenes, ensuring that the legend of Chaplin stayed untarnished, at least in the eyes of the world. Paramount's prop room gem theft. Paramount Pictures in the early 1950s was a symbol of glamour and prestige, a studio known for lavish productions and an enviable stable of stars. Yet, beneath the dazzle of the marquee lights, a subtle and costly series of heists unfolded, one that would shake the studio's confidence in its own security and force a behind-the-scenes scramble to keep scandal from ever reaching the front page. The trouble started quietly. For major productions, think Sunset Boulevard or Roman Holiday, Paramount would borrow genuine jewelry and antique gems from high-end jewelers. The reason was simple. No amount of costume baubles could replicate the way real diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires glittered under studio lights. But with so much authentic treasure passing through the prop rooms, the temptation for theft was immense. Over a period of months, several valuable pieces vanished without a trace. One day, it was a diamond-studded brooch. The next, a pair of sapphire earrings meant for a leading lady's big close-up. Studio executives were horrified. These weren't cheap imitations, but irreplaceable heirlooms on loan, often insured for staggering sums. Quiet panic set in. If the story broke, Paramount risked lawsuits from lenders, higher insurance premiums, and the chilling effect of jewelers refusing future partnerships. Rather than alerting the press or police, Paramount's fixers got to work. Internal security conducted hush-hush investigations. Trusted employees were questioned in locked offices, and several prop department staff were dismissed for unrelated reasons. To keep the jewelers happy and quiet, the studio compensated them directly, often at a loss, with promises of future business and even a few lucrative product placements in upcoming films. Meanwhile, rumors about the thefts began to circulate among the industry's inner circle. Some suggested an inside job, orchestrated by a prop master with underworld connections. Others blamed a network of extras and bit players with access to the set. Occasionally, a piece would resurface at a private estate sale or in the collection of a mysterious socialite, only to be quietly reclaimed by the studio's legal team. But to the public, the story never existed. Paramount's jewel theft crisis was effectively erased from history. No headlines, no court cases, no damage to its sparkling reputation. The show went on, and so did the tradition of dazzling, authentic jewelry on screen, each piece carrying with it the unspoken promise that what happens in Hollywood's shadows stays in Hollywood's shadows. In Hollywood's golden age, the real drama didn't always play out on the screen. Behind every shimmering costume and sparkling jewel, there were secrets, schemes, and heists the world was never meant to see. Studios rewrote reality to protect their legends, burying scandals with the same artistry they used to make stars. But in the end, the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks, reminding us that in Hollywood, every legend has a shadow, and every treasure has its price.